Hey everyone, welcome to the Slice of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. Joining me today is the CEO of Zocdoc, Oliver Kharraz. Oliver, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. Good to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited to have you. I'm sure every one of our audience members knows you, but let's assume there's a couple that don't. So if you could give us a quick overview of your background, then we can dive into more about Zocdoc.
Oh, happy to. So, as you can tell by my accent, I grew up in Germany. I started my very first company right out of high school. It was a pre-internet online company back in the day when emails took 5 days to get from Munich to Los Angeles. At some point, I saw the internet coming, and I realized, oh, I have two choices. I can drop out of college and make my company internet ready, or I can sell the company before everyone else sees the internet coming. Also, well, I made the great decision to sell it. This is the early 90s. And that was a great decision because it protected me from too much money too early on in life. A couple of years later, people got millions and millions of dollars just for an idea, leave alone a working, fully bootstrapped business. I had at that point taken sort of my modest gains from the sale and paid my way through med school, was working really, really hard, but realized as I was working as a doctor that my true passion was actually to be an entrepreneur, wanted to start another company, and had also realized at that point that I sold my first one too cheaply. So I said, let's learn something about business first. I joined a company called McKinsey and Company, a consulting outfit where I thought, well, this is where I get my sort of business education and I get paid at the same time. That ended up being a lot more interesting than I thought. And so I stayed there for a long time, became a junior partner, and became sort of McKinsey's global expert on healthcare technology, and started Zocdoc ultimately out of McKinsey when they started to put the golden handcuffs on me. And I just realized I have to start my company now or I will never do it.
For you, what was that aha moment that made you want to start ZocDoc? So obviously, you went to medical school, you had the consulting experience that McKinsey offers. Um, what was that period where you're like, "Oh, I need to start this. I need to dive back into entrepreneurship."
I knew from sort of day one when I left my medical career that ultimately I wanted to start another company. And I think if your question is like, why be an entrepreneur? That's such a terrible trade-off when it's sort of risk-adjusted return on your effort. I think every entrepreneur has their own story, maybe their own chip on their shoulder, why they need to do that. I very positively know it comes from sort of the way I was raised. My dad was a social activist in his youth in a country that wasn't very safe, and he got arrested by the Secret Service, tortured. They broke one of his vertebrae, and a bone splinter went into his spinal cord, paralyzed both of his arms. And I already ever knew him, with paralyzed arms, where you could literally see through his hands because they were only bone and skin and no more muscle. And he raised me with this idea that talent brings responsibility, and I sort of have to live up to that example and want to change something at a really massive scale. Having said that, like a startup, I think can only really work when it also creates a lot of value for everyone involved because otherwise you can't get the very, very best people to help solve the problem that you're tackling.
Wow, what a story and level of like something that really motivated you to want to build, not just be an entrepreneur but build these great businesses. Obviously Zocdoc's a household name. I have to go pretty far for someone not to hear of Zocdoc. And
I'm probably
kudos.
blushing, right? Thanks.
um, it's I'm super excited for what you and the team have built over there. And I know, so let's go through kind of how the company started, what it looked like at the beginning. And then I know you went through a pivot during the pandemic. Let's also address that because I think it's important for entrepreneurs out there that are listening to know that pivoting is part of the entrepreneur journey, and not pivoting is what can end up killing your business. So would love to hear kind of what Zocdoc looked like in the beginning days and then post pivot.
Absolutely. So the fundamental insight behind Zocdoc is that it was just too hard for a patient to find a doctor, right? From the time they pick up the phone and dial for doctors till they actually see a doctor. It's nearly a month, right? And there's not another industry where if you are going to spend good money, you have to wait a month to actually get access to this. And healthcare is maybe the most important one. Now, when we set out and said, well, we want to solve this problem, everyone told us, yes, but there's a shortage of doctors, and therefore everyone will have to wait. There's not really a solution to this. And our contrarian insight at the core of Zocdoc was, no, there are last minute cancellations, there's no shows, there's reschedules, there's a hidden supply of healthcare that if you just make it findable, you can create a win-win, where the doctors are going to be better off because their perishable inventory it gets utilized, and the patients are much better off because they can see the doctor much closer to the time that they actually want to, and that's ultimately, I think, the win-win that's at the core of Zocdoc, and that's really the thing that worked from day one. And we've been very quickly able to sort of shorten the time from to see a doctor from like the roughly a month that it takes you when you use the phone to 24 hours or less, in all the markets where we have a significant footprint. And today, nearly all appointments happen within 72 hours. And if it's not the same day, it's most of the time the patient's choice as to why that happens a little bit later. Now, that sounds like, oh, this business worked from day one. But as you said, that was absolutely not the case. It worked in the sense that we had a great value proposition for the patients, and we've spread without really any material marketing, from patient to patient, just because we made a very cumbersome process much easier. But where it didn't work is for the doctor, because our initial model was to charge a flat subscription fee where every doctor would pay us the same amount, no matter whether they got 10 new patients from us a year or 10,000. And as you may imagine, when the value creation is so incredibly distributed, but you charge everyone the same price, you're charging nearly everyone the wrong price, either too much or too little, right? And it turns out that that business model had unsustainable unit economics. Now, it took us a while to actually react to this for a host of reasons. But once we had that insight, we realized, no, we need to find a way to make it more frictionless for providers to join, so that we can offer even more patients the choice they want, and that we can make it so that providers actually pay for value that we deliver, so that there, it's a win-win in every scenario. And so that was a major undertaking, because we did this pivot when we were already at scale with the old business model, and it was a multi-year journey to get to a model where we are today, where we charge every provider per new patient booking. And I'm happy to go into what sort of went into the pivot, both in the decision making and in the actual execution of it, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I would love that, because I was obviously a huge fan of Zocdoc even before the pandemic, and then the pandemic came out of nowhere, and it affected a lot of businesses. But you quickly pivoted, so let's talk about what that. Let's also talk about the aha moment around, hey, we need to pivot or we could be hurt here. I think that's important, and how quickly did that moment happen?
So that's super interesting, and the pandemic is maybe an easy example to see that, because we had to go through two pivots ultimately, right? The first one was the business model transition, where we went from the flat fee subscription to a per usage, if you want to, model, and that was actually finished in December of 2019, and we had a great January, a great February 2020, and then the pandemic came. And with that, utilization drops of 70, 80, 90% in the initial weeks of the pandemic. So, that was probably the worst time to have just migrated on a usage-based model, when usage just drops away because no one wants to go and see the doctor physically. Because revenue dropped so much and so quickly, the need to pivot was very obvious to everyone. Now, which direction to pivot, I think, is a much more difficult question. And we had meetings with the board twice a week, when our revenue was sort of disappearing, and there was obviously the solution to say, well, we need to right size the staff, to make sure that we also take our expenses down in sync with the revenue. The other option was obviously to say, no, we bet on ourselves, and we think that we can offer something on the Zocdoc marketplace that has value in the pandemic. Now we chose the latter path, and we decided to bet on telehealth as something that we can add very quickly to the pandemic, to the marketplace, during the pandemic. And so within weeks, we had over 10,000 providers offering their services through telehealth on the Zocdoc platform, and sort of revenue started to return, and we actually were able to eke out a growth in 2020, despite sort of an initial wipeout in Q2. And that's sort of an ongoing point of pride, even though telehealth per se is sort of only a supplemental service at this point. It's clear that patients have a strong preference for in-person visits now that the pandemic has sort of receded. But it just speaks to the point that when there is a disruption happening to your business, where the economics and the mechanics don't make sense anymore, you need to very quickly understand what your options are, which one you're betting on, and then go very resolutely to make that happen. And we were, I think, blessed with a team that didn't get bogged down in worries, but were ready to execute, and had that resilience to do that in the face of a major disruption to the business.
Yeah, your team moved pretty swiftly. I remember kind of following the whole progress, because I'll go on Zocdoc from time to time. But I'll tell you why initially. It was not probably for the reason you even built the platform. Your platform is so aesthetically pleasing. I, in your resources, like your list of like the insurance carrier, like you put together some really good resources that also drive people to the website. So I mean, kudos to you and the team. You have a great marketing team,
Thank
because
you.
they
I'll
put
pass
together
that
some
on.
great materials. um, well
I think
so
so
you
too,
you
but
you
I'll pass on your compliment.
yeah, I really appreciate it. I know they'll appreciate it, right? That's the type of feedback I always like to hear, as well. But yeah, so I mean, you really executed this pivot better than I think many companies, which speaks to obviously you and your team's resilience. So kudos to all of you again. What I want to focus on now, Oliver, is what's next. A lot's happened over the last couple of years. The pivot, uh, getting everything rolling. What's next for the company that you're really excited about and you're willing to share here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that Zocdoc obviously has enormous value, for patients to find their doctor, enormous value for doctors to make sure they're fully utilized. But I think our calling to give power to the patient actually requires us to be the connective tissue in healthcare, where we are not trying to replace the doctor or replace the payer or replace the practice management system, but be kind of the glue that makes all of these things work more tightly together. And so you've seen us obviously historically, writing all these integrations into the doctor PHR. We have now a very broad set of integrations working with everyone who has even a fraction of a percent of market share. And we're starting to make this available to third parties. So we, in the summer, released a brand new product, really the first new product offering in years, our Zocdoc for Developer offering, where now third parties can tap into all the technology that we've built, are able to sort of essentially get all the building blocks, the Legos from which we build Zocdoc.com, and build integrated into their own applications, and make their own ideas a reality without having to worry about all the lack of interoperability between the different practice management systems that doctors use.
Well, I'm super excited for what you continue to do at ZocDoc and beyond, and really excited to see you at the HLTH conference in Vegas, coming up. That'll be a lot of fun. A lot of so much networking in a short period of time, and a lot of content, right? But thank you so much for coming on the podcast once again. I really appreciate it. This was awesome.
Thank you so much. Good to be here and appreciate you inviting us. Thank you.